Number 6.
This took place about 3, maybe 4 years ago. It was a calm winter evening, and my parents were gone for a couple of days on Christmas Eve to relax after a very tiring last day at work. It was just me, my video games, and my dog, Chase. I'm a 14-year-old male, 6'1" at the time, so I was a pretty big dude for my age. I had taken up MMA, and I had also started going to the gym for a couple of years by that time, so I could take care of myself if needed to. Now, back to the story. I was home alone, playing some Battlefield on my PS3, all chores taken care of. My dog is fed, and lying next to me. I did my usual routine as every other night. Play some PS3 until about 12:30 a.m. Wash my teeth, mess around on my phone for a bit, and then go to sleep. It was about 1:20 a.m. I was on my phone when I heard something. Like faint footsteps going around my backyard. Onto the left side of the house, where the bathroom window is. It's basically like this. To give an insight of how my house is from the inside, there are 2 floors. The first is where the kitchen, living room, and bathroom are. There's a staircase to the left of the bathroom door, which goes upstairs to the bedroom. My room is the first door to the right, as soon as you walk up the stairs. My parents' room is a few steps to the left. Chase is a very protective dog, so when he hears anything, he stands up and bolts it downstairs to the front door. Only now, he just stood up and went to the start of the staircase, just staring down onto the bathroom door. As soon as I exited my bedroom to check out what was going on, I heard what sounded like the bathroom window shuffling. I froze. Slowly, I made my way into my bedroom, calling Chase behind me with a hand gesture. I turned off the lights in my room, as they were the only ones on in the house, and I made my way to the staircase again. I don't know why I did that. Dumb move, I know, but I did. So yeah. I crouch walked down the stairs, and on the second to last step, the bathroom window opened, with a slight thump as it hit the top of its frame. Right then and there, fight or flight kicked in. If I made a run for it, there was a very high chance he would see me, and I didn't know if he had a gun on him, so I stood there, unarmed, with my only options being whatever I had learned over the course of 5 years of MMA, and my dog. I waited for what seemed like a minute, which in real life couldn't have been more than 10 seconds, and then I see him. Black hood on, black skinny jeans, black all-stars, and long, greasy blonde hair. He hadn't seen me yet, but if he turned around, me and Chase were ready for a fight. He turned around, and as soon as his eyes met mine, my fist had already connected with his bottom jaw. I hit him hard enough to hit his head against the wall. He then proceeded to lose consciousness with Chase growling on top of him. After that, I called my mom, and then the cops. The police showed up in 10, maybe 15 minutes, and they arrested the dude. My parents arrived the next day, never to leave me home alone again.
Number 5.
Just the other night, there was a windstorm that blew through my town. The wind was accompanied by a downpour of rain. Having grown up on the coast of Oregon, I'd fallen in love with the sound of rain, especially when it's hitting the cement patio outside my bedroom window. So I had my window open, so I could hear the rain better, and settled into bed, curling up in my blankets and trying to fall asleep. Not long after settling in, I heard what sounded like nails, or claws, scratching at the cement. This wasn't entirely out of place, seeing as I have 2 wolf hybrids who usually sleep out back at night, so I brushed it off and tried to drift off again. Not much later, I hear it again. I opened my eyes and focused on the sound. The more I listened, the more it became obvious that this wasn't Cova or Anya. If they were moving around, I would hear their tags jingling. I would hear the distinct pattern of them walking. But this was as if someone was taking their nails and scratching at the cement. Being too lazy to get up and put pants on to check if the dogs were inside, I texted my stepdad and asked if he'd let the girls out or not. He told me no, that since the wind was blowing so hard and there was so much rain, he brought them inside about an hour ago. I told him about the sound I was hearing, so he got up and grabbed a flashlight. I heard him walk by my bedroom door and open the back door directly outside my window. He came back in and told me he didn't see anything, but if I heard it again to just look outside. So he went back to bed, and I stayed there, listening. It was quiet for a bit, so I figured maybe I was just hearing leaves sliding across the ground. I had finally begun to fall asleep when I heard a hard thud on the outside of my bedroom wall. It startled me and I got up, peeking out of the window to see what the hell it was. There was no way it could have been a raccoon, because since we got our dogs, they haven't bothered coming into our yard. I see something small and black bolt across the yard. That was honestly the last thing I expected to see. I decided to just sit and listen. I wrapped myself up in my blanket and got my phone, texting my friend Justin to tell him about the sound. There's something outside my window, and it just ran into the side of the house. It didn't take long for him to reply, since he had just gotten off work. It's probably just a raccoon or something. No, they don't come to our yard anymore. Not since we got Cova. And it's too small to be a raccoon, unless it's a baby. Well, if you're unsettled by it, I can stay up and talk with you if you want. Yeah, I'd like that. For the next half hour, I was hearing fast skittering, tapping, thumping, and hissing coming from outside my window, until it stopped suddenly. I thought that would be the end of it, until I heard what sounded like claws scraping the wall. Pressing my ear to the wall, it sounded as if something was slowly crawling up the side of the house. Justin! Shit, it sounds like it's climbing up the wall. Dude, it's under my window. What the fuck is this thing? Shit, that's creepy. Just try to relax. Thanks, man. Real helpful. Continuing to listen, the sound stopped and I was thinking I was just tripping myself out, until I heard a soft tap, tap, tap on the glass. By this point, I'm freaking the fuck out. Justin, it's tapping on my window. It's tapping my goddamn window. Of course. Now of all times, he doesn't answer. And I yell for my stepdad, who is snoring like a bear in the other room. But almost as soon as I yell for him, my two dogs come bolting into my room, barking and growling. As soon as the dogs came in barking, I heard whatever it is hiss and scrape down my wall, before I heard the grass in the yard being disturbed. I was sitting in my bed, freaking out as Cova and Anya lay beside my bed and stare at the window. After a few minutes, I get a text from Justin. Shit, my roommates needed help with something. Is everything okay? I told him yes, that the dogs had scared it off, and I was going to go on my laptop to distract myself. He ended up calling and talking to me until I fell asleep. There's no way it was just an animal. If it was, the dogs would not have reacted the way they did. I've encountered a lot of things, but never at my own home. I really hope that it never happens again.
Number 4.
I was seeing this guy Jack for a couple of months, and when I broke it off, I thought he was okay with it. He took it well, said he'd see me around, and we went our separate ways. I lived on a dead-end street at the very end of the street. I had huge windows, and knew my neighbor's cars, and I knew Jack's car. About a week after we broke up, I started to see Jack drive by my apartment and quickly pull into the back parking lot that went the whole block, parallel to the street. Sometimes I would walk outside and see his car parked at the end of the street. I once circled the block and came up to his car and asked, "What the fuck are you doing here?" His response was something along the lines of, "Just seeing if you were home." "Okay, you fucking weirdo." I went back inside. At first I let it go. I was a full-time student and worked full-time, so I hardly had time to placate a man I wasn't interested in anymore. Not to mention I was young, 19, and I for sure didn't believe or think anything bad could happen to me. After a couple of weeks, it got a little creepy, and I would find things on my car or in my mailbox from Jack. Stuffed animals, candy with notes like, "Please don't leave me," or "I'll wait." Nothing too crazy or anything that scared me. He was a good-looking guy, had a good job, and took care of himself. How dangerous could he be? Jack started showing up at my school's gym and cafeteria. He didn't go to the college, and as far as I knew, had no reason to be there. He would just watch me, and a few times, he tried to corner me to talk to me or give me a hug. This is where I started to get a little freaked. I finally went to the cops because I was just tired of him always being around. Plus, I had started seeing a new guy, and it was always awkward for me to see Jack when I was holding hands with the new guy. He hadn't actually done anything illegal, but I lived alone, and far from any good friends or family at the time, so I was a little nervous. After I went to the police, he completely changed. He would drive up and down for hours around my block. I would see him at the grocery store, or the local ice cream shop, like he knew my schedule. One day, I left to go for a run like I usually do. I always went around the same time in the late afternoon and always the same route. The neighborhood I lived in connected to the Horsemen's Association. They were allowed to have horses in the city proper, so, conveniently, there was a well-maintained path for them to use to get to the forest preserve. From the start of the trail in my neighborhood to the parking lot/trailhead was about 2 miles. It went through empty fields and retention ponds. No houses or other people, but that never bothered me. So, off I go into my own world as I concentrated more on the crunch of the gravel under my feet or the fall color starting to pop. As I closed the distance to the trailhead, there were 4 cop cars just waiting. Weird for where I lived. Very low crime and a quiet part of town. A cop stops me and asks my name. I give it and he asks me to come with them. Now I am freaked. I was shitting bricks. Finally, we get to the station and they explain everything. Jack had been picked up for loitering and suspicious behavior. I happened to live across the street from the police chief of the town, whose house sided up to the entrance of that running path. He knew about Jack as I had mentioned about a month before, that someone kept coming by and hanging about. The police had noticed Jack's car earlier in the day, and when Jack spent hours hanging around, he got suspicious. He had Jack tracked down and asked him questions. He admitted to letting them search his car. They discovered that Jack had duct tape and a bottle of chloroform. I quickly moved.
Number 3.
In 2007, I was 20 years old and lived with my girlfriend. Neither of us had a vehicle at the time, so when we got into an argument one night, I left and started walking the 8 miles to my mum's house to give things a chance to settle down. This was around 1 AM. As I'm walking, a small goldish car pulls up beside me, and the driver, a middle-aged black man with a slight speech impediment, asks me if I need a ride, which I declined. He asked me if I was sure several times, and I said yes, but thanked him, and he drove off. For the next couple of miles, he was idling at every major intersection, sometimes honking his horn at me slightly. Every time I noticed him, I made a conscious effort not to look at him again, or invite any more of his attention. I thought he had got tired of messing with me, until I walked in front of a small used car dealership. I heard someone say, "Hey, come here," from the parking lot. It was him again. I stopped, obviously startled, and he tries to calm me down. "Whoa, chill, dog. Hey man, you sure you don't need a ride? I'm not busy at all, and I really don't mind." I again declined, and he starts asking me questions left and right. I talked to him for a good 45 minutes or so, hoping it'd make him leave me alone before I go on a less busy street. He asked me what my name was several times, as if to check if I gave him a fake one. I did, but I lied consistently. He also kept asking me if I had any weapons on me, or if I was violent. I told him no, which was probably stupid. He then started trying to get me to step closer, so he didn't have to yell to talk to me. No. Finally, I tell him I need to keep walking. He again offers me a ride, is again rejected, and then says, "Look man, I'm really just trying to get some weed." What the fuck? Given his behaviour and the circumstances, that seemed very unlikely. I walked off and crossed the street and zigzagged through some shopping centres to lose him. If I did, it was only temporarily. At this point, I was confused, slightly freaked out, and mildly paranoid. But what happened next really freaked me out. An hour or so later, I was on a quiet street, almost to my mum's house. Psst! I look to my right, and I see a chubby but attractive Hispanic woman smiling really big and waving me in to approach her. She was in a driveway of a yard full of plants, a man-made jungle type thing. Can't see a lot of the yard from the street. She did not live there. Yeah? What's up? I asked her, not moving towards her at all. "Hey baby, wanna come home?" "No thanks," I told her. "Oh, you have a girlfriend?" "I just don't know you," I say, and then continue walking. I honestly thought at the time that this was a setup for a robbery or something, but it appeared she was alone, and there was no one else in the truck. I glanced back towards her, and she's now got her truck door open, like she's going to leave, but the back of her shorts are pulled down, with her ass fully exposed and staring up at the sky like a lunatic. "Are you alright?" I asked. I was genuinely concerned. "Yes, I'm just waiting for someone." Waiting for someone in the sky at 2:30 AM in a stranger's driveway, hidden from the view of a street? Kit, good luck, weirdo. She had to be on something. I kept walking. She backs out of her truck and drives past me. As she does, I see there was someone else in the truck the whole time. Must have been hiding for some reason. It was the black dude from earlier. Staring. Eyes like daggers. No smile, or anything this time. I get chills even now thinking about realising for the first time that this guy really wanted me for something, and I probably almost became a victim of some major crime. Shortly thereafter, I made it to my mum's. 5 freaking years pass. It's 2012. I have a car, but decide to walk to Walmart for dog food. I'm in the same general area, with my iPad mini in my pocket and earbuds. I see a car pull up next to me in the parking lot. "Hey dog, do you know how to get to the Landmark Apartments?" I recognised him immediately, even after 5 years. He looks like a skinnier version of Fleece Johnson from MSNBC's Lockup. I am almost positive he didn't recognise me, or remember our previous encounter. I take out my iPad, connect to Wi-Fi, and try to look up this apartment complex. It did not exist. He volunteers that his name is Carlton. I start telling him where he might want to check, but he's not interested, and starts asking me questions. Again, asked my name several times, asked if I'm armed or violent, asked me to step closer so he doesn't have to yell. How often does this guy do this shit, for fuck's sake? "You going to Walmart? I can take you there." "No thanks, guy." He keeps trying to get me into the car and asking if I have weapons. Finally, I make it clear I'm not going near him. He starts to pull off and then stops immediately. "Look man, to be honest with you, I'm just trying to find some weed." Okay, no. Screw this. I jog to Walmart, send an MMS message to my girlfriend of his car and license plate in case I turned up dead somehow, and haven't seen him since. If he was doing this kind of thing for at least 5 years, he had to have been successful at some point. I personally hope that he was just gay and horny, but he gave off a serial killer vibe.
Number 2.
When I was 19, I was a venture scout. It's sort of like Boy Scouts, only for older kids, and it's gender mixed. I decided to go to this week-long mixed scouting crew camping trip with a friend of mine. But a few days before going, my friend from Venture Scouts bailed, so I'd be going up into the mountains alone with a bunch of strangers, which was no big deal for me. I can handle myself. When I got there, I was the only Venture Scout, and the only girl. It was a little awkward, but most of the Boy Scouts were pretty nice and easy to get along with. Although they weren't used to camping with a girl, they happily accepted me as just one of the guys. But there was this one guy, Danny. From the first day of camp, he wouldn't take his eyes off me. He'd just stare at me. It was a little uncomfortable, yeah, but I figured he was just socially inept with girls or something, and I tried to pay him no mind. The next day, while we were hiking, we all split off into pairs, and it turned out I was paired with Danny. He looked a little too excited about the idea of hiking with me alone. His eyes always seemed a little too wide, a bit crazy looking, but he was a small guy. Spindly, unkempt hair, a little shorter than I was at 5'7". I figured I'd be able to take him out in a fight if he tried anything, so I didn't raise a fuss about it. Before settling out to the hike, he kept asking me if I needed help putting on my sunscreen. Even though I kept declining, he kept pushing the question and tried to put sunscreen on me until one of the guys told him to cut it out. While we were hiking together, he kept probing me. "How old are you?" he'd ask. 19, almost 20, I'd reply. Don't lie. You must be 14 or something. You're so innocent. Young, innocent girls are always the cutest. He kept asking innocent enough questions, like where I lived, if I had siblings, what my favorite color was. But he then started asking me if I'd ever heard of BDSM. I was taken aback by this and was more than a little uncomfortable, so I'd pretend to not know what he was talking about, all the while trying to give as many cues as possible for him to drop the subject. But he then started going on about what BDSM was, about tying girls up, about hitting them and burning them. At this point I was freaking out a little bit, but keeping my cool. I didn't want to show him my distress, any chinks in my armor, as I knew he'd probably get off on making me squirm. The only thought I had was, what the fuck? Seriously, what the fuck? Then, he started complimenting my skin. You don't see a lot of girls with pale skin, "Do you use moisturizer?" he'd ask, attempting to touch my hand. But I kept my arms close to me, held fast to my backpack. I was incredibly tense, and every muscle in my body was screaming. I sorely regretted wearing a tank top, as I could feel his eyes on me. He started telling me how pale skin is beautiful, since you can see the rope burns and the bruises better. The way he said it sent chills down my spine, and the anxious knots forming in my stomach grew tighter. He asked if I was a virgin. Then he asked me if I fantasized about rape, and if I'd like to try out rape play. Wide-eyed in disbelief, I turned my gaze away from the dirt path and looked at him. He was smiling. A creepy, childish sort of smile that was just chilling. I kept silent and quickened my pace. He felt too close, far too close. I wanted to run. He could probably see the fear in me at this point. There was no hiding it. But then, I saw that another pair of scouts were ahead of us. I ran to them, telling them that the four of us should group up and go together. At first they declined, saying that we're supposed to be going in groups of 2, but upon seeing how panicked and distressed I was, the 2 guys changed their minds, looking confusedly at Danny, who was silently glaring at them. I was just glad that someone else other than Danny was there. The 4 of us went up the mountain, and I tried to keep close to the other 2 boys, and as far away from Danny as possible. Upon reaching the end of the trail, and regrouping with the others, the 2 Boy Scouts offered to switch partners to descend the mountain path. Danny looked downright upset, angry even. He was looking at me as if he were betrayed, but I didn't care if it pissed him off. I accepted the offer of switching partners, and was able to get back to camp in relative peace. On the way down, the Boy Scout I was with asked me if Danny was bothering me or something. I lied and said he wasn't bothering me too much. After all, I was 19. I thought it would be pathetic to get so distressed about some weird 15-year-old kid. I figured that so long as I stuck with the other guys, I'd be fine. But then, that night, I was alone in my tent. Everyone else got to sleep in pairs of 2 or 3, but since I was the only girl, I had to be alone in my tent. It's always a little creepy being alone and isolated in the forest, away from everyone else. The scoutmasters insisted my tent be far away from the boys' tents so that they wouldn't bother me, but it only put me in a more vulnerable, isolated position. I sorely wished I'd been closer to the protection of the rest of the group. Late at night, I heard rustling outside. I figured it was just a deer or an elk or something, as it usually was, and went back to sleep. But then I heard my tent opening. Opening my eyes, I peeked through the crack in my sleeping bag to see what it was, and there, I saw the white of an eye looking back at me. Looking through the opening of my small tent. It was Danny, staring at me. I froze, holding my breath. I held my dad's hunting knife close to me, hiding in my sleeping bag, not moving a muscle, staring Danny down, pretending to be asleep, ready to fight at any moment should he take one step into my tent. But he didn't do anything. He just stared, watching me, breathing heavily and muttering incoherently to himself. "Are you there?" I thought I could hear him say. Eventually, after what felt like an hour, he left. The next morning, exhausted, I caught naps when, and if I could, and kept close to the other scouts in my group. It was difficult to maintain my calm and cool composure. The scout leaders were a little frustrated with me, since it seemed like I wasn't paying much attention to their instructions. But at this point, I didn't care much for it. I was always on some level of alert, as Danny would sometimes creep up behind me and caress my neck, or play with and try to smell my hair. And every night, Danny was there, watching. One night, he went digging through my backpack, looking for something. Unfortunately for him, I kept all my clothes and personals tucked away with me in my sleeping bag. He left with nothing. I grew up in rough situations and circumstances, so I always felt I can only rely on myself. Asking for help was never an option as a kid. Asking for help meant you're weak, so it hardly even occurred to me. I was prepared to tough out the rest of the week, but a little over halfway through the week, Danny was called away by the scoutmasters and sent home. I got the feeling that the Boy Scout that helped me before saw what he was doing, and sent in a complaint about him to the staff. While everyone else was confused and happily saying bye, he just crossed his arms firmly and stared as Danny left. Danny looked so bewildered and confused by it all, like he didn't understand what he did to deserve being kicked out of camp. It was so strange. I tried my best to forget about it, and the rest of the week went off without a hitch. But the more I think back on it, the more I realize how damn freaky and bizarre that kid really was. I fear he may end up being some kind of serial rapist or something when he grows up. All I know for certain is that he was very disturbed. I'm just glad my dad told me to take his hunting knife in with me, even though knives weren't allowed at this camp. My father insisted I keep it for protection, and I don't regret it.
Number 1.
When I was a sophomore in college, I lived in a small but beautiful historic studio apartment in a small East Coast city that had somewhat of a good reputation for crime or danger. However, the neighbourhood I lived in was usually considered one of the good neighbourhoods. It was close to the city's university and was mostly students living there, especially on the street my building was on. My building was a huge 4-story townhouse, if you can really call it that. It was really a mansion as a whole, built in 1895. The architecture was really awesome. Built-in bookshelves and huge mahogany pocket doors that slid into the walls. Anyway, the building wasn't exactly in mint condition, and my landlord was pretty lazy. He would always come by and check up on things, and make promises to get stuff fixed, but never really got around to doing much of anything. The apartment I was renting was on the first floor. My front door was immediately on the left as you walk into the building's door from the street. This door, the building's front door, which from the street opened to a small lobby area with only one door in it, mine, and a staircase to the other apartments upstairs, was huge and heavy and was never locked. In fact, you couldn't lock it. And in fact, it didn't even close all the way. So basically, the door to my apartment was open to the street. I asked my landlord countless times to please do something about the front door, but he never did anything. Well, one night, I was getting home from work and it was very late, about 3:45 AM. I worked as a pizza delivery driver at a place that was open really late every night. And I was just sitting on my couch watching a little TV before I went to bed. I had also gotten totally naked, something I truly loved being able to do, considering I lived alone. Haha. Anyway, not even 10 minutes since I'd gotten home and sat down, I heard 3 slow knocks at my door. I'm thinking, who the fuck would be at my door at this hour? What could they possibly want? Why didn't I hear the building's front door open like I normally do? Young and naive, I was half scared and half intrigued. I put a robe on and slowly crept towards the door, which, by the way, was literally right next to the couch where I was sitting. At this point in time, my door didn't have a peephole, so I just had to kind of take a leap of faith and open the door. When I did, a tall, emaciated, middle-aged man stood staring down at me, with low eyes and a grin. He was wearing all black, many layers, and a big black trench coat. The first thing he said was, "Can I come in?" With the door barely open, I got a deep pit in my stomach and just went, no man, what's up? He just stared into my eyes for a second, clearly disappointed, and then said, "I've seen you around," and started to grin again. The pit in my stomach had evolved into a churning sensation, and I was starting to get nauseous. "Yeah, "I've been watching you, and I like the way you look," he said. "So you gay? Bisexual?" I was just like, "I dunno, but it's late and I'm going to bed. Bye." He kind of nodded and lingered for a second, as did I, watching to make sure I saw him leave the building. Once he did, I closed the door, locked it, and stood with my hand still on the knob for a good minute at least. After I snapped out of my shock, I ran over to my couch and pushed it up against the door. I ended up sleeping on the couch that night, even though it was right there. It just made me feel safer, like I could hear if something happened. Well, nothing happened that night. It wasn't until about a week later, on one of my nights off from work, that I was sitting around my apartment winding down by myself after I had a few friends over drinking and smoking a little bit, as college kids will do. All of a sudden, I heard a weird rattling noise coming from across the room, so I turned off the music I was playing, to find out that it was coming from none other than my front doorknob. I looked at it for a second, and saw that both the knob and the top lock were jiggling. Someone was trying to get in. Like a deer in headlights, I was frozen, staring at the things wiggle and shake, until I started to see the top lock actually budge and start to turn. I leapt up from my chair and soared to the door, grabbing tightly on the lock, forcefully twisting it back to being locked. The jiggling of the lock and knob stopped for a second, because whoever it was clearly knew that I knew. It was only a second though, because I started struggling again, and I had to use all my might to keep it still. Sweat was dripping down my forehead and my ribcage, and after about 15 seconds of wrestling with this intruder, it suddenly stopped, and I heard the building door open and close, and footsteps run down the stairs of the stoop to the sidewalk. Just like I was before, I was paralysed with my hands at the door for a good while before I realised I was crying and shaking and that I needed to call someone. My instinct was to call the police. In hindsight, I regret this for the following reasons. I was basically having a panic attack while I was on the phone with 911 and actually threw up during the call. And I think that's when they decided I was just fucked up or something. When the two police got to my apartment, they stood in my doorway as I struggled to recount to them what had happened, as I'm shaking and crying. I noticed at one point that they're both smirking and laughing, and I say, "What's funny right now?" One of them goes, "It reeks of marijuana." I was just like, okay. And basically argued with them after that. Long story short, they ended up confiscating a bunch of shit from my apartment, and basically turning the whole situation into a little mini drug bust. Although they say they weren't going to charge me with anything. Just take my shit. Nothing about this attempted break-in besides, keep your door locked. I was devastated and felt so helpless. I hate to make this story so long, so I'll try to keep the last part short. Basically, this same scenario happened one more time about 2 weeks from the last time. Only, instead of calling the police, I called my dad, who raced down in an hour, which is a 2-hour drive from his house to this place. And he had a crowbar up his sleeve, haha. Unfortunately, by the time he had gotten there, whoever it was had already left. They didn't struggle very hard this time. My dad ended up cussing out my landlord and demanding he get the door fixed and install a new lock and a peephole on my door. He did make this happen within a reasonable amount of time. And I also got one of those bars you wedge between the doorknob and the floor, as well as an aluminium baseball bat to protect myself with, so I felt a lot better from then on. Needless to say though, I ended my lease for that apartment a month early and never moved back to that street. I never found out for sure who was trying to pick my locks, and if it was the guy who had come to my door the first time. But whoever it was, let's not meet.
Well, anyway guys, that's it for this video. If you enjoyed, then please leave a like, share and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have any stories of your own which you would like to have shared, please make sure to contact me, link in the description, and you may be featured in a future video. Also, huge thank you to Sino Studios for being in this video. He's very close to 8,000 subs, so let's try and get him there. Also, we just did a huge collaboration on his channel with a few other YouTubers, so make sure to check them all out and check out that video. Well, anyway, I hope to see you soon, and I will speak to you later.